While many Earth dwellers prefer to focus their attention on matters beyond this planet, beyond current time frames, others concern themselves with matters here and now. Food for Thought Productions is pleased to focus its attention on the latter group, the individuals and organizations dedicated to making this world, this life, optimal. We're honored to present Dr. Craig B. Holman, Project Director for the Center for Governmental Studies. Here's Dr. Holman with our producer, Lee Baker.
This is something that's very fascinating to me, government studies, and you're so involved with that. And I noticed from your background that you've had a wealth of experience and also do a lot of writing.
Yes, the Center for Governmental Studies is a private think tank based in Los Angeles. It was originally begun back in 1984 as just a two-person research institution. Tracy Weston and Robert Stern had set it up. And they rented a little office in this small business complex in Los Angeles with manual typewriters, and began their,
that long ago.
that long ago, and began their mission of trying to reduce the role of money in politics in California. So,
how long ago was this?
Well, this was back in 1984 when they began, and one of the first products that came out of the Center for Governmental Studies was a report on the financing of California elections. And as always with the Center for Governmental Studies, we will do a research study on a particular problem, write up our study, publish it as a book, and then offer at the end an appendix that provides some sort of model law or a program for reform for fixing the problems that we identified. And out of this first book came Proposition 68, which was one of California's early campaign finance reform initiatives.
Yeah, I see.
That went on the ballot back in 1988 and was approved by voters.
Now, this book was distributed to the public?
That's right. The title of the book is called The New Gold Rush. The most important element of how the Center for Governmental Studies is able to get some of the work done is we've set up this very prestigious bipartisan board of people involved in the legal community, in the business community, and other social activities. Cornell Meyer, Frank Wheat. We had Warren Christopher, who prior to becoming Secretary of State was on our board. And with having that sort of prestigious board presiding over the work of the Center for Governmental Studies, when we do a study and publish our results, it goes to them first and then they distribute it. And when you've got someone like Warren Christopher handing out a book, people tend to listen.
Yes.
And so we often get results. The primary purpose of the Center for Governmental Studies is not just to think and research, but it's to actually come up with a plan for action to get things done. Now, since we're a nonprofit, we don't actually get out and do the campaigning or lobbying, but we rely on other people to pick up our work.
You provide the information.
We provide the information. We provide our recommendations for what ought to be done. Oftentimes through the commission will coalesce and form coalitions that can make action happen, and we serve as the think tank behind movements like that.
Now, I noticed you write for a lot of different publications. Does the center have its own newsletter or a publication that comes out regularly?
The Center for Governmental Studies has a bi-monthly newsletter that reports on such things as new developments in campaign finance, especially electronic filing and reporting. But that isn't a major source of our communication to the public. Our major source really tends to be when we do a comprehensive study and then publish books and articles. That's where we tend to get the public's attention because that has the real research behind it.
Right, right.
And that offers the substance of what we're all about.
No.
So we've published many books. We published roughly about a dozen books lately, and large books dealing with every issue you can imagine, from campaign finance to the initiative process, to judicial elections.
I wanted to ask you about the initiative process, but before we get to that, you were saying you do the research and make that available, leading to action. What do you hope happens, or what happens after the information is out in the books and in the publications?
We hope that respectable groups and respectable individuals will pick up our recommendations and go with our recommendations. And often it happens. I mentioned earlier that we started out as a two-person think tank with just a manual typewriter. Well, now we have computers, and we've also expanded the office considerably. I mean, we have 12 researchers now working with the Center for Governmental Studies, which isn't very large, but for a nonprofit, and especially for a nonprofit that focuses on the sort of issues we focus on, it's a fairly sizable and a very, very credible research institution given its size.
So now you're supported by grants, I assume.
Right.
As a nonprofit, you can apply for grants, and does that
Right.
support your work?
Yeah, and as a nonprofit, we're forever applying for grants. I mean, I wish we didn't have that sort of element to have to do, but we do. Every time we need money, which is constantly, we come up with projects and we have to approach other foundations, the Joyce Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, other groups like that, and say, this is a serious problem in California or American politics, and we would like to address it. This is how we plan on doing so. Could we get some funding to be able to do this?
I see.
And that's how we operate. And, you know, and every time, most times, when we come out with some reports, we have had a credible impact. One of the most recent ones, which I'm quite proud of, is we did a study on the financing of judicial elections in Los Angeles County, and came out with a series of recommendations, a lot addressing campaign finance reforms for judicial elections. And what happened was the American Bar Association has picked up that book, or was distributed to them through our board. And
They didn't pick it up, you handed it.
Right. And they seriously read it, seriously started debating it. Back in 1999, they started debating it at a conference in Canada. And then by the annual ABA convention in Atlanta, Georgia.
What does ABA stand for?
American Bar Association
I see.
convention. They adopted many of our recommendations in their model code of judicial conduct. Now, the National Model Code of Judicial Conduct does not in itself have any sort of mandatory weight over what state bars have to do, state bar associations have to do. However, it is routinely adopted by state bar associations. So I'm expecting now that throughout the nation, lawyers groups, state bar associations are going to be adopting a series of campaign finance reform for judicial elections as a mandatory system in judicial elections, contribution limits, for instance.
So reports of these things is what gets you the next grant, is that it?
Yes, yes. And because our reports so far have been successful and influential, we have been able to build upon that and continue building upon that. The Center for Governmental Studies right now is considered one of the leading authorities when it comes to campaign finance reform or the initiative process, you know, or even judicial politics.
And I wanted to ask you, how does the initiative process work? Who does the initiating, and then where does it go from there?
It's interesting how the center first started getting into studying the initiative process. We had focused, our primary purpose at first was money in politics and how to reduce the role of money in politics. Well, in California, after we did Prop 68 and have dealt with candidate elections here, we noticed that money is out of control in the initiative process. So we got a grant to study the initiative process and what we can do about money in the initiative process. Ended up concluding, because of a lot of Supreme Court rulings, there isn't much we can do about the money side, but there are all kinds of other types of reforms we can do, you know, such as allowing proponents to have some amendability over the initiative after it's qualified for the ballot and has gone through a hearing, things like that. So,
Well, where does all this money come from that funds the initiatives?
Special interest groups. With the initiative process, of course, it's so ironic. The initiative process was invented first of all back in California in 1911 to bypass the special interest group control over the state legislative process. And mainly Southern Pacific Railroad was the primary special interest group dominating the legislature.
Because a lot of people have the impression, oh, this is so the public can have an
Right.
impact on legislation.
And that's what it was exactly designed to do, and
Right.
it had been doing so for quite a while, until about in the 1980s. Then the amount of money flowing into the initiative process became phenomenal, and it got so ironic that Southern Pacific Railroad itself started putting initiatives on California's ballot. And that was the very special interest group the initiative process was designed to get around. So they're even using it. Now we have so much money pouring into the initiative process, it's breathtaking. More money goes into the initiative process in California than goes to lobby the state legislature, that goes to elect legislators. You know, especially now we've got some new very high finance, high powerful special interest groups like the Indian gaming casino groups. And they, in the last couple elections, have pumped more money into the gaming initiatives than has ever been pumped into any initiative anywhere in the world. You know, the money is so out of control in California's initiative process. A little while ago, I was invited by the city of Bologna, Italy, to go give a speech out to their city council. They were debating setting up the initiative process similar to the California system, but they wanted someone to come out there and tell them what to avoid. How can they make sure they don't duplicate the California nightmare, is how it was described to me. And when you have that much money going into the initiative process, it gets very worrisome.
What advice did you have for them?
I had plenty of advice. There are things that can be done that may be too late here in California. I mean, one is in Italy, I think in Europe, they could actually set up mandatory limits on how much money can be spent on initiatives and how much can be contributed there. We can't do that in California because the courts have interpreted that as a violation of our Constitution.
Free speech.
Of free speech rights. And so if...
Which isn't free, actually.
Right. It's
expensive.
Right, it's paid speech is what it is, how they could call it free speech. But Italy may not be hobbled by that sort of Supreme Court ruling, so they could do a lot there. They could restrict how much money, they could prohibit paying signature gatherers to go out and get signatures. That was, in my opinion, the real key of where we went wrong. Is that by allowing the payment of signature gatherers, it became profitable back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and that's when the initiative industry blossomed. And these people who would hire students to go out and get signatures then became regular businesses, and once they became businesses, they started taking on consulting purposes and handling the campaigns, and that became what we call the initiative industry. It's, if you could stop it at its source, I was recommending to the Bologna City Council that they could reduce the role of money in politics and not suffer the California nightmare for the initiative process. They haven't done anything yet, by the way, in Bologna.
Is there anything that we can do? Oh, you say your organization went from the manual typewriter to the computer, but they haven't bought you a Palm yet. You still, I say you still.
My office is trying to get me to use a cell phone. I refuse to use a cell phone. They bought me a cell phone, and I travel quite a bit on business, and they want me using that cell phone so they can get a hold of me is what they really want.
It's what it is.
And I refuse to even use that.
You're too smart for that. You're too smart for that.
That's right.
So is there some way that, because I've always, that those people who stand in front of the market, you know, getting you to sign for the initiatives, seem so dedicated to this idea that you think, wow, this must be a good thing.
It's quite...
What can we do to, that seems like a very insidious
yeah,
situation.
It's quite a fraud, and I'm surprised how many people don't realize what a fraud this is.
That's why I wanted to ask you about it.
When you come out of a grocery store and you have this petitioner in front of you, you know, they approach you, and they usually will have 2 or 3 petitions, and they'll be very different petitions. They come off as supporting a cause,
Yes.
and they're not behind a cause at
Absolutely.
all. All they are there for is to get $1 for your signature. And they will often hold one initiative that'll be sponsored by the Democratic Party, another sponsored by the Republican Party, and a third one sponsored by who knows who. And they don't care. They don't care. They are instructed, in the art of signature gathering, they are instructed not to discuss the initiative with you except for one line. Do you want to sign for campaign finance reform? And if you actually want to stop and say, well, what kind of reform is this? They're instructed to give you a copy of the petition and get you out of the way so they can approach the next person. And you can sit there and read it if you want. But, you know, it's such a fraud. What most Californians do, or anybody does, is you just want to sign to get this person out of your face, you know, so you can go on. And that's why now ballot qualification of an initiative in California, if you're willing to put up $1 million, you can get anything on the ballot. I am a firm believer in the initiative process. I'm highlighting the problems that we have with the initiative process, and I think it should be fixed.
Yeah.
But I need the initiative process, and I know Californians want the initiative process, so I'm a firm believer in that. Before I go off on judicial elections here.
And how many other states have an initiative process?
24 states.
24 states have
The
it.
initiative process. They're fairly different in how they operate. None of the states are overwhelmed as badly as California is with money in the initiative process. In other states, they can still do volunteer signature gathering drives. In California, the last volunteer drive we've ever done is in 1982. And ever since then, every initiative that's been on the ballot bought signatures to get on the ballot. Other states don't have that problem. You know, so it is problematic. You know, some of these signature gathering firms, when the Eastern European, Eastern Soviet bloc broke up and started becoming free nations, free states, they started toying with the idea, like Bologna, Italy, of having the initiative process. And right away, the main signature gathering firms here in California, Kelly Kimball, Mike Arno, some of these other big businesses of the initiative industry, toured throughout Eastern Europe and was explaining to them how to set up the initiative process. They're in trouble if they follow their advice.
What can we do, though? I mean, if the general public wants to have the benefits of the initiative process, what can we do to remedy some of these problems that you mentioned?
It's the biggest problem is getting to the ballot, and it is extremely grueling and very, very hard to get to the ballot. And I don't believe much can be done on that at this point. With Proposition 208, that was a campaign finance reform initiative that was placed on the 1996 ballot, for instance. We had the largest coalition of volunteers working behind that. The League of Women Voters, Common Cause, AARP, the United We Stand Party, which now the Reform Party.
Now, do you work with all of those groups?
I work with all those groups.
Supply them with?
Right. I work with any group or any government agency that seeks my advice, but I frequently work with these groups because they tend to be the proponents of reducing money in politics. But just to fill in the story, it was so hard. We had the legions of people out in the streets gathering signatures for this campaign finance reform initiative, and we still had to pay for half of the signatures to get on the ballot, or we never would have made it. We had almost folded. We almost weren't there. And then suddenly the national AARP came to us and gave us $40,000, which was a big boost in the arm. You know, and suddenly we got out in the streets again and started mobilizing. We were able to buy more signatures, and just barely made it. So even with this, I mean, that's how difficult it is to get on the ballot. There are some changes that could be made. For instance, we could change the Constitution here in California to count signatures raised by volunteers to count more than signatures that are bought. So for instance, for every volunteer signature, say it counts 5, and every bought signature counts 1. And that would help level the playing field a little bit between the business interests that now dominate the initiative process and groups that are civic organizations.
Now, how would you make that happen?
That would require a change in the Constitution, and it has been and is being debated. The League of Women Voters has been seriously studying the issue of how to reform the initiative process in California. I've been consulting with them on this, and we have all been coming up with this idea of, we realize the legislature just won't touch the initiative process. They're afraid of it. And so if we're going to reform the initiative process, we're going to have to do it by an initiative. We're going to have to run an initiative to reform the initiative process. And that is something that California may see in the very near future.
It seems like that would be worth, worth doing.
It would definitely be worth doing. The problem is trying to get to the ballot again. I mean, you really got to...
Getting enough signatures.
Right, and getting the coalition together to make it to the ballot. You know, the saving grace of the initiative process, though, is once you do make it to the ballots, then money doesn't matter that much. I mean, even though this money pours in on the campaigns, pro and con on the initiatives, there is no statistical relationship in the campaign as to how much money is being spent for and against an initiative and whether it's going to be approved. Voters tend to be very sharp at the polls. Voters are not fools, and so when we get something like the Proposition 208 on the ballot, a campaign finance reform initiative on the ballot, we exhausted almost all our money to get to the ballot. We had nothing left for the campaign. And there was a very sizable campaign waged against us. You know, all we could do is go to editorial boards, write op-ed pieces, write letters to the editor, and go to groups and make speeches. I mean, we had no money. And we won overwhelmingly. Voters will usually not be conned at the polls. So once you can get to the ballot, then the role of money is much less important.
You think the voters are smarter than...
and the people who sign the petitions.
I see.
You know, one of the arguments for signing a petition without knowing what it is
it's an emotional thing.
Put it on the ballot, let voters decide, you know.
Yes. Yes, and they use that phrase.
Yes, I know. They're instructed to.
Oh,
it's part of the lesson. There's
see.
actually all these initiative industries have schools and training groups for all their signature gatherers.
Well, now you've given me a new script. You know, when they say that to me, I can say I don't want it on the ballot.
Yeah, I rarely sign a petition nowadays, unless I actually know fully what it is.
You've changed my life when it comes to that. What do you think about this idea that people think it's good to have the balance of having one party in the legislature and the other party in the executive?
It's what's made the initiative process also very important, because when you have that kind of break in the government between the parties, they stalemate.
It's a stalemate.
They stalemate and they get nothing done. If you've noticed, throughout much of California history until recently, we've had exactly that, where the parties have split in terms of the executive branch and the legislative branch. And consequently, very little important legislation has come out of the legislature in the last 15 years. Almost all the important public policy decisions in California have come via the initiative process. You know, and that's one of the purposes of the initiative process, besides getting around special interest groups that may dominate legislatures. It's also if the government is unable to act, unable to come to a consensus, and unable to pass bills.
Do you put out information about which initiatives are worth signing?
We will not play a campaign role, and that's starting to get close to that, since we're a nonprofit think tank. But when we are asked by a group to review an initiative and offer a memorandum and analysis on it, we will do that. But we will, as a private think tank, nonprofit think tank, we won't play that sort of proactive role usually.
I see.
But we will answer queries, and our memorandums can be used, and we give speeches and addresses as to what we think is going on.
Isn't that pretty similar to what the League of Women Voters does? How do you differ from that group?
The League of Women Voters has both elements. They've got both the 501c3, which is our nonprofit status, and they can't get directly involved in campaigns. Then they have their political wing of a 501c4 that can get involved in campaigns. So they're in that sense, they're broader than we are. But we will provide any sort of research assistance we can for the League whenever
So then
asked.
they can go further with their other.
That's right. That's
of
right.
their other,
That's right. And we very often work with the League of Women Voters. I'm a proud member of the League of Women Voters, as a matter of fact. And we very often work with the League and with Common Cause.
Well, now National Organization for Women has a number of men who are members, so that's if it's a good organization and you're in favor of what they're doing, gender doesn't matter.
When I was first made an honorary member of the League of Women Voters because of my research that I had done for them. And I was an expert witness in a court case in Colorado defending their campaign finance law, Amendment 15. And I had traditionally avoided joining groups like Common Cause, AARP, not that I could join AARP, but the League of Women Voters and other groups, any groups that are involved in politics, because I wanted to enter the courtroom saying, I'm not a member of these groups, I'm independent. And I'm sitting there in the witness box, and James Bopp, the lawyer, comes up and he begins his cross-exam on me and says, are you now or have you ever been a member of Common Cause or the League of Women Voters? And the League had just made me an honorary member. I go, oh, he caught me.
Shades of McCarthy.
He didn't quite put it that way, but that was the gist of
yes.
it. And the point was to try to taint my testimony simply because I was a member of the League.
And
But
you had to own up.
Yes, I had to own up. I tried explaining that I was made an honorary member and I didn't actually join on my own.
That's even worse. That's even.
I have since joined on my own. As long as I got caught, might as well do what I believe in anyway. And
now, do you concentrate your attention on this state, on California, or nationally?
We're now national. When we began back in the 1984, we were focusing on California only. But we've learned a lot from studying politics in California, and many of our lessons are applicable nationally. And so we've branched out nationally. We've helped draft the full public financing initiative in Arizona that was recently approved. We've helped draft the campaign finance law in Colorado. We testify as expert witnesses in Alaska, Colorado, Arkansas, Missouri on behalf of their campaign finance laws. So we're now national.
So they come to you for help?
Yes.
They come to you. Now, you don't have branches, do you? Or do you? Or do you
No, we don't have a branch.
This is the headquarters, and this is the...
This is the headquarters, but we're starting, we're getting big enough now that we are debating setting up a branch in Washington. But at this point, we don't have any concrete plans of doing so. People know where we are in Los Angeles. There is a little bit of a disadvantage that groups often will just go to the East Coast to get advice. And that's why we've been toying with the idea of setting up a branch out on the East Coast.
Well, especially in Washington.
Especially
that
in
would
Washington.
Be,
right, especially in Washington.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.